The great lamp hiccuped and threw a ragged arc before guttering. Elias Crane slammed the gallery door and shoved his shoulder against the wind to keep rain from the lens. Duty sat in the base of his throat like an iron weight, and he moved because hands that kept a light could not pause. He fumbled the oil key with one raw hand and felt the strap of the pocket watch against his palm. Counting rotations of the wick with a steady rhythm, he had learned by repeating it in thousands of nights. The flame coughed again, and the smear on the inner glass showed where salt had crusted. Duty told him he could not leave the gallery while any ship might be near. A lamp that failed could kill men who trusted that arc of warmth and brass to lead them past rocks. He worked mechanically. Trim wick, tighten bracket, clean the inner face with a corner of a rag. The wind hit the tower like a hand and sent the gallery shaking. Rain spattered the panes and stung his face. He worked with short, precise motions. He mouthed the steps as if speaking to another keeper bedside. Trim. Tighten. Test. He tasted oil and iron. Each motion named a responsibility that had kept him from drifting after Anna's chest had stopped rising. Below the lantern room a knock came at the heavy door in 2 staccato bars. Elias paused with the rag halfway over the glass and listened to the beat echo. He did not step away from the lamp. He leaned his cheek to the brass to steady his balance and called, "Who's there?" Because the tower admitted few and answered fewer. The knock returned harder, the lock clattered. A man's voice, damp and close to breaking from cold, said, "Keeper Crane, harbor messenger. We have a note for you, sir." Elias's hands tightened around the key. He moved down the spiral, boots slick on the stair, and pulled the door open a crack while keeping the lamp within sight. The messenger stood on the landing, dripping seawater from his shoulders, a sealed scrap pressed to his chest. His face went white where the storm had stripped warmth. "Jonas, cutter is delayed, sir," the man said without preamble. "Harbormaster sealed this afternoon. Cutter's not out." Shules shifted on the chart. "They re not coming till morning, maybe not till at least first light." He held out the paper. "Sorry to bring this, Mr. Crane. I should not have climbed in, but..." He swallowed and held the note like a weight between them. Elias slit the wax with a small penknife and scanned the harbormaster's words. The lines were practical and clipped, but a sentence underlined in the margin read, "Shoal change near Sable Head, approach with extreme caution." A new line, "Supply delays expected." Elias felt doubt come as a physical pressure at the center of his ribs. Duty had told him to expect these inconveniences. Doubt made his hands tremble where the oil key lay. He looked down at the messenger, name Elias. "Daniel, sir, Daniel Pritchard." "I came as fast as I could." Daniel's teeth showed in a quick, wet smile. "Captain Marlowe sent word he can take his sloop in with that reef." He signaled from off the point. "He says a lantern's out by the rocks." The messenger's voice went thin. "There's a light." "It isn't T. Marlowe." Elias stared at the horizon where the ink of sea met a smear of night. He held the note against his palm and felt the paper's dampness. A new fear pushed through the doubt. A ship could be there, close enough to see but out of reach to the cutter. He thought of the lamp's arc, of men steering by his beam. He moved back up the stairs and set the rag aside. He checked the bracket again with thumbs that knew the grain of the metal. In the quarter light, he paused and a familiar image rose. Anna, head tilted, showing him how to knot a two, turn grip on a rope while humming a short tune. He stopped that memory in the mouth of his mind and used it. He set the spare wick, tightened the clamp, and listened. On the deck below, "Daniel, if it's true, Mr. Crane, those men may be clinging to wreckage." Marlowe signaled he can see a lantern by the rocks, but his cutter can cross the shoal. "He wanted me to tell you, sir, if you could hold your light steady, guide them even." Daniel's sentence stumbled and left a gap that was full of water. Elias's jaw set. He did not say he would. He started to climb past the lantern gallery instead. He paused at the log alcove and felt his fingers close on the leather, bound book that lived beneath a folded scrap in Anna's hand. The folded scrap, browned at the crease, had been placed there by Anna months ago. The handwriting was hers, steady, small. He smoothed the page with one finger and read aloud to himself, the words walking him back to a normalness he could hold to in doing the work. The scrap held a note she had tucked into the book once, when he had been rough with the lamp during a gale. Check the lower bracket next tide. He had read it 10,000 times and carried the instruction like a tool. He went back up, checked the lower mount, and found the bracket had shifted. The bolt was loose and the setter had fretted the threads with salt. He tightened the bolt and set his shoulder against the housing as he straightened it. The lamp steadied its arc by a hair's breadth. He breathed once, short and controlled, then drew the wick and tested the beam. The light steadied, thin and true. He rubbed the key between thumb and forefinger until his skin warmed from the motion. A faint set of signals flashed along the dark sea. Elias watched the horizon and translated the lantern's pulses by memory, short, long, short, an irregular rhythm that did not match Marlowe's steady pattern. Elias brought the spyglass to his eye. The small lantern sat low on the rocks, its flame guttering in the wind. There was a broken keel near it and the shape of a boat turned on its side, half submerged. The light blinked once and did not return. Elias felt his certainty shift again. The doubt that had sat in his rib now leapt into something sharper. He found his hands shaking with an anger that mixed with fear. Jonas, he said aloud, tasting the name. Jonas was the relief keeper due to arrive and take this watch. Jonas' absence had begun as inconvenience. Now it suggested misfortune. He leaned out of the window and fashioned a quick semaphore with his arm, flashing the signal he had learned for position and danger. Far below, a small sloop answered, thin white shapes of sail, dark hull. Captain Marlowe's hand went up in a return. Elias read the reply. Marlowe signaled he could not approach because of shoal. He tapped the rail and felt each concussion of wave against the tower. He could imagine the cutter turning on a ledge and listing. He could imagine men shouting under rain. He forced the next move to be practical. He lit an extra hand lantern, wedged it in the gallery and sent a lower arc to mark the shallow. He set small black marks on the inner ring of the lens with his thumb so the beam widened slightly and covered a swath the cutter could aim by. He did this because duty told him how to widen a channel of light with little alterations. At midnight the tide pulled back and revealed a wrecked boat half, buried along the tide line. The guttered lantern lay beside splintered timbers. Elias could see the frayed edge of sail and a length of rope knotted around a broken spar. He shouted down to the slip where Marlowe had rowed up with his men. "Marlowe, is that your lantern?" he demanded. Marlowe answered, voice rough and close. "No, keeper. That's not mine. That's on the rocks by Sable Head. My cutter's flat on the ledge. I swear I saw men clinging to that spar a while back." He pointed with an arm that trembled from cold. "The shoal took us blind. We can skirt, but not close enough. If your beam holds, sir, they'll have a chance to see a way." Elias heard the words and felt his responsibility expand into his limbs. He looked at Daniel, who had come up the stones to the foot of the tower, and met his eyes. Daniel's face was raw, but his stance held a determination that matched Elias' own. "Mr. Crane, Daniel, we can row a small boat, 2 men. If you can throw a line, we might pull someone free. Do you want us to try?" Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second. He thought of the gallery's rail and the lamp's bracket and of Anna's note. He thought of Jonas' absence and of a cutter that might already be wrecked on the same rocks. Doubt rose in his chest. Should he risk men in a small boat where shoals lay hidden? Then the rhythm of duty took over. Duty sharpened into a decision. He set his jaw. "Yes. Send 2. Bind them with rope. I'll make the mark for them." He handed down a coil and felt the wood of the stair under his palms. They moved fast. Daniel and 2 of Marlowe's crew took a small skiff and launched into seas that slapped hard at the oars. Elias stayed above, feeling each splash like a report on his skin. He watched the men in the small boat find the line he had widened with thumb marks and steer toward the cut he had adjusted. The gallery lamp threw a longer, steadier arc as he kept the burner trimmed and his shoulders braced. He rubbed the oil key to temper the brass against the salt. A fresh signal came from the horizon, a frantic blink that did not match the fisherman's pattern. Elias brought the spyglass up and tracked the light to a low shape. a half-buried rowboat with a gutted lantern, one oar flung aside. He could see hands moving on the timbers and something small being tied to a mast. He could see a man slumped against a break. He felt fear again, a pressure that made his knees go slack, but he kept acting. His fingers slipped and the lamp rocked. For a moment the flame flared and leaned toward the glass. He clenched the mount with both hands and felt the grating heat on his palms. He pushed his shoulder into the housing and used a strip of oilskin to pad his knuckles. The lamp slid a fraction and the wick dipped. He cursed once, low and hard. He had to hold the lamp in place with his shoulder while freeing a hand to fetch a spare bracket. He paced the small room, breath sharp, and set the bracket under the base. He began to hammer a temporary pin to hold the mount in place. Anna's memory came again, not as a haze but as a specific image. Her fingers passing him the wedge to split a tea log, telling him to press the wedge in firm. He remembered the exact angle she had used so many times. He drove the pin at that angle. The lamp steadied with a sound like a relieved exhale. He let his forehead rest on the brass for a second, then looked out and saw the small boat now close to the wreck. The midnight air held a sudden sharp cliffhanger. From below came a cry, short, strangled. Elias dropped the pin and ran to the gallery window.
"Jonas!"
Someone shouted from the skiff. The name was flung into the wind and tangled with the surf. All motion in Elias froze. For a silence that tasted like metal, nothing moved except the lamps and the sea. Then Marlowe's voice, broken and hoarse, shouted, "Jonas, cutter, we pulled a man on a coil of rope. He might be Jonas, sir." He salived but hit his head. He says the cutter struck twice before the stern went under. The words rearranged the night's shape. Elias felt a twist of something like guilt and a surge of urgency. The earlier note about delays now read differently. Jonas was not merely late. He had been in the wreck and could be one of those they had just hauled out. He moved down again, feeling the stair under his feet, his heart beating in a way that matched the surf. At the landing he found Daniel holding a blanket and Marlowe supporting a man who hung like a weight between them. Jonas' face was pale and salt stung. His lip had a cut and his hands shook. He muttered a name, "Keeper," and stopped. Elias set to work with quick, specific motions. He undid Jonas's coat, checked for breaks, pressed a cloth to the cut on the brow. He moved with instruction rather than sound. "Jonas, can you hear me?" he asked. Jonas blinked against the lighter. "Keeper. The cutter led us blind. I tried to." He coughed and then looked at Elias as if measuring the cost. "You kept the lamp." "I could see enough to throw a line." Daniel spoke up in a short, clipped cadence. "Mr. Crane, without your lamp they wouldn't have seen the cut. We owe you for that." Elias felt an abrupt shift inside. Doubt flared, fear spiked, then a hollow, hot clarity as gratitude and exhaustion ran together. He steadied Jonas' head and wrapped the blanket. "You rest. I'll note everything in the log." He had to make an exact record, because a competent record would protect lives and clarify what had happened for the harbourmaster. He sat at the log table with fingers that trembled slightly and wrote in the cramped, practical hand he had used for years. He noted times, names, and the maneuver that had kept the small boat from running aground. Outside, Marlowe and his men hauled at rope and jammed another skiff against the rocks to pull what remained clear. The rescued men, soaked and shivering, clung to one another. Conversation came in short bursts on the sand. "We lost a coil." "No, we've got enough." "Where's the lantern?" "It's out by the spar, faint now." They used names fast. Marlowe, Jonas, Daniel, repeated like good anchors. Each spoken name made someone real and held them accountable to one another. Once his hands had been bandaged and Corm had returned to the landing, Elias climbed slowly back to the lantern gallery. He checked every bolt and clamp as if translating his fatigue into a list of tasks. The lamp threw a steady, clean arc across the rocks. He stood for several long heartbeats and let the warmth bleed into his fingers. He looked at the folded scrap in the logbook, and then at Jonas, below, who now stood with his back against the tower. Jonas watched Elias without speaking and then nodded once, brief and direct. Elias opened the log and wrote a precise, terse entry. Time, sea state, actions taken, names of those helped. He added the names of the men pulled clear. He then folded the page and placed Anna's scrap back where it had been. The small silver locket she had worn, he felt its cool weight in his palm. He did not open it. He held it in his hand for a moment, and then tucked it beneath the log where the leather would press it flat like an old coin. Morning came pale and slow. The men loaded what remained onto Marlowe's skiff. Daniel helped Jonas to his feet and tested his step. "Jonas, you do what the harbor doctor says." "All right, Daniel." Practical, a single line with no flourish. Jonas answered, eyes on Elias. "A keeper. You lit the way." "I don't know what." He stopped and then added simply, "Thank you, Elias." Elias heard the name and felt the night unwind in measured pieces. He walked down to the shoreline once the men had pushed off and set a small lantern on the wet sand near the half-buried spar. He should have recorded more, done more checks, but the tide was high and the sand smelled of kelp and soaked rope. He opened the log again and made a final, precise note, positions, names, the anchor, actions taken. Then he drew a thin line and wrote, as he always did, the simple phrase that closed a keeper's duty: light maintained, lives preserved. Before he closed the book, he touched Anna's locket again and felt the metal warm under his thumb. He walked to the small window and watched Marlowe's sloop move off with the rescued men. Daniel called back, brief and steady. "Take care, Keeper Crane." Marlowe raised a hand. Jonas watched the lighthouse's beam until it diminished to a steady point and then turned away. Elias set the log down with a hand that had stopped shaking. He ran a cloth over the gallery glass, removed the last smudge of salt for accuracy's sake, and checked the wick one last time. The lamp drew a clean circle across the water, and the tower settled into the small business of morning maintenance. He felt exhaustion and ache in his shoulders, and a soreness from where he had held the bracket in place. He also felt a clarity from the night's choices. Duty had asked him to keep the light when relief could not arrive, and he had kept it. He placed the locket back into its hiding place and closed the log with a quiet thud. The entry ended on a concrete note, names listed, time recorded, lamp secured. The men below waved as they left the bay. Elias watched until the sloop became a small, dark smudge and then turned inward, unhurried. He unhooked the oil key, rubbed it once more between thumb and forefinger, and allowed himself to rest in a chair nearest the window. Outside, gulls called like measured punctuation and the new sun washed the wet stones. He let his eyes close for a moment and then opened them to check the lamp again, because his work did not stop with dawn. He set the log back into its place where Anna's folded note warmed the leather, and he rose to begin the day. A drenched man pounded the keeper's door and shouted, "Elias!" "There's a dark hole on the lee shore," your lamp blinked. Elias Crane's fingers tightened on the oil key in the pocket of his coat. Responsibility sat at the base of his throat, old and hard. He moved because the light belongs to other people now. Tom Bray, face raw with sea spray, pushed past the leaned boots by the hearth and spat on to the flagstone. "I saw it, Elias. A black shape, close to the rocks." The men aboard signaled with a lantern and then they steered off. "But your light, it hitching." Elias' jaw set. He was not a man to cower from wind or wet. He was a man trained by routine and by the ledger of lives that the lamp kept safe. He opened the door wider. Cold cut in and carried the taste of iron and salt. "Show me where." "Elias," and the words were short because the night already demanded action. Tom jabbed a thumb toward the slip, down at the lee. "Half a bob and a dark hole." I hauled my skiff up and came. If the lamp failed, I could not sleep knowing a cutter might have run the ledge. Elias stepped outside, pausing only long enough to tug his knitted cap down and button the heavy wool. The wind took his words and sent them after him. The immediate problem was plain. A ship had come near when the lamp was not giving its full sweep. That made the stakes concrete. That made Elias move. He went up the spiral stair with oil key in hand, feeling the familiar grain of the lamp key under his thumb. Every step echoed the small, exact movements he repeated for 20 years. Wind the mechanism, check the drive belt, trim the wick. He kept his hands busy to keep the thought from the surface of his voice, the thought that a previous hiccup had been worse than a stumble. He remembered the night the great lamp hiccuped and threw a ragged arc before the flame steadied. He smelled the lamp's smoke and heard Anna's quiet hum in his mind. That memory did not replace the task. It added weight to it. In the lantern room, the lens leaned dimmer than it should be. Elias walked the rim and ran a gloved hand along the brass. The light did not burn with its usual steady arc. It's slower than it ought to be, Elias. He laid the key across the rim and peered into the pool of glass. He fumbled open the reservoir cap. The oil read low, below the mark he kept with a neat small line in the logbook. "Tom, bring the lamp," he ordered. Now, Tom's breath came quick. "I fetched what I could, Elias. I left Killick's with 2 pails. The cutter could tea come tonight. Chiesto line from last week's gale." Tom's voice sped. The worry in it pressed at Elias' ribs. When Tom and Elias hauled the reservoir lid and tilted the pail, the oil glimmered thin and dark, not the pale, clean lamp oil Elias kept in a marked cask. The tally in the logbook showed more oil left than the tank now held. Elias' hands went still a moment, and a doubt twitched at the sleeve of his concentration. He checked the ledger with a finger. The numbers didn't match. He ran his jaw, the uncertainty sharpened. Had someone else used the oil? Had he miscounted? Could the ledger be wrong? Each thought moved him from simply fixing a lamp to answering a question of responsibility that could cut his name down at the harbor office. Before he could voice the doubt, oars struck the boathouse timbers. A cutter's light bobbed in the slip. 2 men came alongside in a patched skiff. Coxswain Harris of the Coast Guard and Harbour Inspector Lyle. Harris stepped up first, clothes flecked with salt and a bruise on his jaw from a rope that had not holed. Elias Crane, Harris, steady and blunt. "We heard there was trouble. Report tells of a dark hole near the lee. You saw it." Elias pointed toward the glass. "The beam fell short. The oil slow. The reservoir short of what my log shows." Harris looked at the lens, then at the tank. He cursed softly and turned to Lyle. "Inspector Lyle will need to note details." Harris. Lyle, a thin man with a clipped manner, already had his notebook out. Dialogue came quick and functional. "We cannot fetch more fuel, Lyle. Our cutter has sprung most of her starboard planking. We cannot run tonight and we have no spare canisters aboard. If there's a fault here, we must record it, Elias." The Harbour 1T take kindly to an unexplained shortage. Elias felt the responsibility press, but he kept his voice level. "Then I'll run the lamp by hand until we see morning, Inspector. If the drive slips, I'll keep a watch." Lyle's pen scraped. "That will be on your report." Harris exchanged a look with Tom. "You were first on his door." "Tom." Harris. Tom nodded, voice tight. "Yes, I couldn't leave it. Men cost too much out on those rocks." "Elias, your light could save a hole." The exchange moved the scene forward. External pressure tightened the scene into a decision that could not be deferred. They cleared drift and ropes at the slip to haul up a small skiff that sat half buried on the rocks. Tom pulled a length of weed, wet rope, and found a small silver object tangled in the kelp. He thumbed it free and held it up. "What do you make of this, Tom?" The silver locket was dented, sand packed at the seam. Elias did not look at it at once. He smelled the salt off Tom's sleeve and felt the way his chest tightened before recognition could form. He reached and took the object by the chain without touching the dented face with a thumb. The thin silver locket was Anna's, the one she wore when she mended nets by the fire. The memory arrived as a concrete tableau. Anna sitting at the kitchen table with a needle tucked behind her ear, darning a torn glove, humming the tune she used to hum when the wind was soft. Elias' hand closed on the locket and his breath made a small rasp. He did not step back from the work at hand, but his fingers slowed. Anna's name left his lips without sound at first, then he said it aloud. "Anna." Elias breathed. Tom looked at him, then at the locket. "Where did you find it?" "Elias." Tom pointed to the rocks on the rack below the slip. "It was under a curl of weed and bone. I thought someone lost a charm. I didn't know." He stopped, his eyes softened in the light. That small discovery changed the night. It pulled Elias' memory into the present and made the choices heavier. He could not afford softness, and he could not pretend the locket was not Anna's. Harris' hand went to Elias' shoulder. "Crane, We have people out there who depend on that light. Can you keep it? Harris. His voice carried the kind of pragmatic urgency a man of the coast used. Work first, questions later. Elias met Harris' eyes. The sea wind took the pause. I'll stay, Elias. The decision was immediate and absolute. He took the oil key from his pocket and rocked the lamp into its cradle. He cranked the manual mechanism while Harris and Tom worked the gears. The drive belt juddered under their hands and then snapped with a wet, thin sound. The lamp lurched. Elias' palms tightened on the crank and his shoulders rolled to compensate. Keep cranking. Harris barked, Elias! We can rig a temporary belt, but you must hold the flame steady. They argued logistics for 2 short lines. Harris called for rope, Tom for a leather strap, Lyle for a strip of the cutter's planking. They names and actions in sharp turns, 3 to 6 quick exchanges that fit the rule of immediate collaboration. Elias climbed the spiral stair to the lantern room as Harris hauled the leather strap. The flame sputtered at the edge of a scalded wick, throwing a small, ragged light against the glass. Elias worked with calm haste. He trimmed the wick with steady, practiced snips and poured the thinner oil into the reservoir, while Tom fed the crude strap into the gears below. Lyle steadied the lamp's brass housing while Harris wound the strap tight. They made a jury rig with a handful of knots and a strip of spare timber. Each man moved in parts that showed who they were. Harris with practiced military gestures, Tom with gruff efficiency, Lyle with clerkly attention to the ledger. Dialogue clipped the motion. Harris, hold there. Elias, Tom, steady that beam. Lyle marked the time. The cutter's light was reported at 2 hours past first watch. Lyle nodded and wrote. While they worked, Elias felt a second change in his feeling. The initial shock and suspicion hardened into focused fear for the ship reported near the rocks. His breath shortened. His hands stung from salt and friction. He recalled his ledger's small, neat figures and the earlier mismatch. The doubt that rose when he saw the low oil had become suspicion that someone else had used the stores. The suspicion moved him to search the storeroom with the harbor inspector. They forced open timber crates and counted canisters. Each count gave them small relief and small new questions. One crate showed a missing canister where the logbook claimed it should be full. Lyle lifted his head and looked at Elias. This doesn't add up, he said. Either the records are wrong or someone removed a canister without note. Elias' fingers found the ledger again and he read, aloud and crisp, the last entry he had made by his own hand. An early twist arrived. Harris found, taped under an old coil of rope, a scrap of paper with a smudged handwriting, not Elias' it listed times and a name. A signal for a smaller, unregistered delivery to the slip 2 nights prior. That discovery changed the direction of suspicion. Now the question lay beyond mere miscount. Someone had used the slip and left no record. Elias' face tightened. He felt the responsibility shift into a need to protect the light and to account for the missing fuel. He set his jaw and said simply, "We log everything here." "Show me who came." Harris squinted at the scrap. No name clear. Harris, but the handwriting is hurried. The cutter couldn't make it. Lyle. That leaves this place. The tension rose. External evidence had altered how they must act. They returned to the lamp. The jury, rig held but squealed and flexed under load. The lamp's sweep returned, thin and honest. Outside, someone on the shore shouted. Tom dashed to the parapet and pointed at a dark arc where a shape had been seen. "A boat's out there," Tom called. "She shows no sails, a small skiff." "She's close to the outer rock now," Harris shouted back. "Which side?" Tom traced with a fist. "There's a lantern. She hugs the lee." Steering true for the gap, Elias watched the lamp's arc and felt each sweep answer that small lantern. He held the crank and let the mechanism's rhythm steady him. His breathing matched the lamp's rotation. The climax came as the drive grew hot beneath Andrew's hands, but it was Elias who refused the offer to be relieved. Harris, watching the strained tether and the scraping strap, offered a hand. "Take a rest, Crane. Let us hold the crank for a spell. You've done enough." Harris it plain. Elias looked at Harris. Sweat and lamp smoke streaked his face. He could have stepped back and let the Coast Guard take over. He thought of the ship that had shown its lantern, and then steered away earlier. He thought of the locket in his palm and of Anna's hands folding a cloth by lamplight. He saw not a symbol but a small, concrete memory of her steady needlepoint and the smell of boiled tea. He clicked his tongue and answered, "No. I will stay. I will not leave the lamp while she burns odd. Keep the crank set, but I stay at the flame." Harris made a brief, clipped sound and then relented with a nod. "Suit yourself, Elias. But ask for help if you cannot hold it." The exchange was terse and full of salt and work language. 3 quick lines of negotiation that fixed the climax on Elias's choice. Elias' hands cramped after many turns. His shoulder rubbed raw at the joint. The lamp jerked when the strap slipped. He snarled a short, sharp word and steadied it. His breath burned cold in his lungs. The third emotion shift moved inward. The suspicion that had driven him to patrol and the fear that had quickened his hands now turned into a focused resolve. He would shoulder the load himself rather than let happen what might be blamed on him or on a missed ledger entry. For all his private he made a public, physical choice. That decision was not a slogan, it was a set of motions. A tightened grip, a slower, steadier crank, a mending of the makeshift strap with a torn strip of canvas while Tom held a hammer. Exhaustion nearly carried him down the spiral stair. His legs trembled. The world in the stairwell twitched when he misstepped. Tom grabbed his elbow. "Elias! Stand and breathe. You cannot fall." Harris' hands were on Elias's forearm as well. Together they braced him while Lyle used a spare rope to secure a secondary windlass. The trios effort was immediate and raw. A brief strain, 3 rough lines of contact, and the lamp stilled its uneven swing. Elias leaned back against the gallery ledge and let his fingers unclench from the crank for a moment. He pressed the locket into his palm and felt the cool silver ground him. Outside, the sea shifted and the shape of the reported ship came clearer in the low light. A small fishing cutter had turned away from the dangerous reef, a shape receding with a single lantern swinging slow. Harris hailed it, and the vessel's captain blinked a hand and then steered further out. Lyle put away his pen and met Elias's eyes. "We can mark that the lamp held." Lyle, the captain, steered clear, the tension lessened in a single breath. They counted and they logged the repairs in the ledger. Lyle wrote with the precise hand of a man who had to put events into official language. Harris negotiated a terse phrase for the Coast Guard's report. Tom stayed and talked about the rack and the locket as if it were a strange weather report. He in short sentences about finding the locket half, buried where the waves had shoved the wreckage. Someone was ashore here, Elias. Someone came for something. Tom, I couldn't to see faces, only a shadow passing the rocks. Elias looked at the wet sand through the opening of the slip and thought of Anna's needle in the lamplight. He eased the heavy chain of the locket between his fingers and listened to the men around him. The log said what it had to, but the scrap of paper under the rope and the missing canister added a different register of risk. A mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived when Tom, sweeping the slip, found a soaked scrap of fabric pinned to a nail, a corner of a faded shawl with a simple "home" stitched pattern Elias remembered from Anna's workbox. He called for Elias with a voice that held a new edge. Elias went and took the scrap up, fingers blunt with lamp soot. The fabric's hem had a familiar stitch. Elias folded it and pressed it to his face for a moment, concrete and compulsive, the smell of washed linen and the grit of shore sand. He did not say the word that first formed. Instead he breathed and then asked, "Where else was it?" "Tom, did you see footprints toward the ruin of the old quay?" Tom nodded slowly, yes. They went that way. The question shifted the evening. What had been a mechanical failure now had a human thread leading through damp sand and up the old quay. They followed the prints at low tide, boots sliding on slimy stones. Harris carried a lantern and Elias kept the locket against his chest. Lyle kept a careful distance, making notes. The prints faded at the old quay's collapsed wall where a roped ladder had once hung. Someone had used the back approach and moved goods in the dark. The discovery altered the night's stakes again. Someone had been at the slip, taken fuel or goods, left without record, and had probably seen the lamp hiccup. Elias's pulses ran a small loop of anger and fear. Something had happened that no ledger would record. He felt both the need to account and the shame of thinking he might be blamed. They returned to the cottage as the first smear of mauve appeared over the far sea. The wind eased. Harris lit a small pipe and watched the horizon with a professional stillness. Lyle closed his book with a neat fold of the hands. Tom rubbed his palms together and said, "If the light had failed a half-hour more, I don't know what would have happened to that cutter." "I'm glad you were here, Elias." Elias put the locket into his inner pocket with a deliberate, slow motion. He sat at the hearth while the others drank their thin tea and talked in low sentences about repairs. He let the soft scrape of spoon on tin and the fire's small crackle fill the room with practical sounds. They had settled the immediate danger. The ship had steered clear and the jury rig held. The men packed tools and prepared to leave the slip tidy. Before the Coast Guard went, Lyle tapped the ledger. "I'll write the official line. Mechanical fault plus human interference. We'll open an inquiry about the missing canister and the anonymous note. For now, Crane, you can list days and amounts precisely." "It helps." Elias nodded and wrote with a hand that did not waver. He chose details rather than explanations. He logged the time the lamp first faltered, the arrival of Tom Bray, Harris cutter's damage, and Lyle's notations. Each recorded detail rooted the night's events in practical language and moved him from suspicion through action to documentation. The harbor crew left with curt thanks and the smell of tar. Tom stayed until dawn thinned the fog to a pale rinse of blue. He went at last with a brisk hand to Elias's shoulder. "Anna would have patched things down proper, Elias. She wouldn't have let the lamp go cold." "You did well." Elias held the locket and remembered her neat stitches and the small dimple in her cheek when she laughed at a petty complaint. He pressed his thumb to the dent on the locket and felt the cold metal against skin. That simple material contact anchored him. At pale dawn, Harris reported that a nearby vessel had changed course and passed the rocks safely. Lyle filed his note. Tom waved and went. The shore was lined with ordinary detritus. A battered oar, a coil of rope, seaweed caught in a hawser. Elias took the locket and walked to the parapet. He opened the locket and saw the small, faded photo Anna kept against a backing of card. He did not speak. He shut it and tucked it back in the pocket. The night had tested him. He had chosen to stay. He had logged, repaired, and answered questions. The chapter closed with practical motion rather than a speech. Elias set the ledger on the table and relined the lamp's wick. He pinned the scrap of shawl in a tin and placed it by the hearth. He placed a new tally in the ledger, precise and neat. Then he stepped to the door and looked out at the wide, salt, sparked morning and the rocks that had threatened a cutter hours before. He turned back and said nothing. He picked up Anna's locket, closed it, and set it in the small drawer where he kept the lamp key. The final beat was a small, concrete action. He fastened the drawer and then walked upstairs to the lantern room to check the lamp's rotation one more time, his hand on the brass until the smooth, regular rhythm steadied his shoulders. The immediate conflict had been resolved. The ledger recorded the night's facts, and the question of who had come to the quay would wait for another day. Elias stayed at the lamp until the mechanism hummed true, and the light carved its measured arc across the sea. Rain struck Elias' coat before he reached the rowboat. Tom Bray was already hauling at a soaked blanket while the harbourmaster argued with a deckhand.
"Elias!"
"Your light blinked," Tom shouted, voice raw from wind and salt. Suspicion sharpened Elias' hands. He tested the lamp's key with 2 fingers and found his grip steady despite the cold. The immediate problem stood plain. Men at the rocks said the beacon had failed, and a dark hole lay where safety belonged. That accusation cut into his duty and into something older beneath it. Elias pushed through the press of bodies and reached the boat. Rain ran from the gunwale in ribbons. He bent, pressed gloved palms against a sodden coat tossed near a scuff of drag marks, and found fresh salt in the furrows of the sand where the keel had ground. "Tom, where did this come from?" Elias' voice firm and quiet. He showed the oil key in his hand without thinking, the brass dull with use. The men around him stepped back as if the metal answered for him from the lee. "Harbourmaster Ellis." He held a lantern low so the light slashed across faces, We saw something move, your lamp skipped. That snowstorm trick. If the beacon goes, men die. Ellis' words landed like a fact. Elias felt the old pull of responsibility as a physical weight in his throat. He did not answer immediately. He rubbed the oil key between thumb and forefinger the way he always had, a small motion that steadied him. Tom jabbed a finger at the broken line of the boat's paint. It came close enough to tie off, then drifted. Your light went ragged, Elias. Tom's voice tightened. He looked at Elias the way a man looks at another who could not be trusted to keep a machine that saves lives. Elias' chest narrowed with a second emotion. A guarded shame that came when one's tools failed in plain sight. They argued at the water's edge, while gulls called and rain flattened their shoulders. Maggie returned from below the rocks, coat heavy and eyes bright from exposure. She held something cupped in both hands, found this tangled on the stern, she said, and opened her palm to show a thin silver locket, its chain knotted and sand stiff. Elias saw the locket's worn hinge and the tiny engraving on its back. He did not speak for a beat. The locket carried a tight ache that moved him like a muscle. He had been through nights when the lamp hiccuped and through ragged arcs, nights when he slammed the gallery door against lashing rain and kept the light by muscle alone. This was that memory made fresh. The accusation from Chapter 1 echoed in Tom's shouted words, and the drenched man pounding the door from Chapter 2 returned in the crowd's anger. The present accusation and those earlier alarms braided together into a single problem. Either the lantern had failed by accident, or someone had worked to silence it. Harbourmaster Ellis knelt and inspected the keel line where the boat had scraped the rocks. He pointed to the sand where a smudge of oil made a dark streak. "Look at this," he said, grit packed into the lamp fittings. Not the usual wear. Someone's been at it. The phrase implied intent, and suspicion shifted into something colder. Doubt about neighbors, about choices made in dim places. Elias felt the doubt like a slap and answered with action. They marched back toward the tower in slick boots. The lantern room smelled of lamp smoke and brass polish, the glass rimmed with salt. Elias climbed the spiral stairs and moved through the lamp's shallow gallery with practiced motions. He checked the wick, felt the brass, tested the rotation. Harbourmaster Ellis followed and ran a gloved hand along the Fresnel lens rim, there Ellis pointing. A smear of oil marked the inside metal ring. Grit packed along the lower gear teeth in a pattern that did not match simple salt corrosion. Elias put his palm to the smear and tasted metal on his fingers. He crouched, lifted the gear, and found a curved scrape where something had been shoved between teeth. Someone jammed it and wiped the lamp after. Ellis. He did not sound triumphant, he sounded tired. Elias set his jaw. The discovery moved suspicion into a practical question. Who would quiet a lighthouse, and why? Outside, a small party argued on the steps below. Tom and Ellis spoke faster now. 3 quick exchanges that pinched the air. He says the lamp faltered. Tom, it faltered. We saw it. We need a name. Ellis returned. If it was sabotage, we need proof before we hang an accusation on a man who keeps lives. Elias, did you see anyone? No, Elias, I was tending the lamp until it hiccuped. I came down when I heard pounding on the door. His voice was steady. But his hands trembled a fraction as he set the oil key on the table and turned it out of habit. Maggie knelt at the lantern room door and tapped her boot against a smear of sand. Boot prints, she said. She pointed at a line of shallow prints along the gallery's outer stones leading away toward the lee rocks. They go down to the cave. The mention of the cave sharpened the group's attention. Tracks were proof, and proof drove action. They gathered a small party. Tom, Maggie, Elias, and 2 townsmen. The tide drew the steps slick and exposed pools of weed and shell. Elias kept the brass oil key in his pocket. He felt Anna like a pull at his ribs, her small acts, the way she tucked a handkerchief into a pocket. He did not tell them of that feeling. Instead, he checked the lamp one last time and left the lantern room light steady, keyed, and humming with its soft mechanical rotation. The path to the sea, cave cut under a shelf of rock. Wind found them in gusts that made their clothes clap. Boot prints led down to a horseshoe of dark where the cave opened to the shore. A faint light quivered within at the far mouth, too regular to be a lantern left to drift. Maggie's breath left her in a thin steam. "That's someone with intent," she said. Elias moved forward, pulse in his throat now driven by a different emotion. Anger sharpening into resolve. He would find who had turned a light into a signal and why. They crouched just inside the cave mouth and found a small, deliberate ring of disturbed pebbles. A waxy smear marked where a lamp had been set. Behind it, against the inside wall, lay a scattering of mirrors and bits of oilcloth, tools to blink and confuse a larger light. Tom hissed. They dampened the spare lanterns and set mirrors. They tried to steal sight, not ships. The claim changed the crime from accident into planning. From the cave's dark, a voice spoke without stepping forward. "You don't have to haul that whole accusation into the open, Tom." Gideon Marsh stepped into the lantern's glow, shoulders bent against damp. He carried a small, cloth-wrapped bundle and wore a stain of salt across his coat. His eyes flicked to Elias and softened for a count of a breath. Gideon moved like a man used to hiding in wind. Pressed places, Gideon, Harbourmaster Ellis. He did not hide the bluntness in his tone. "You were the one on the rocks. I'm protecting what I must." "Gideon, leave it at that." Elias felt the conversation pivot. Suspicion moved into accusation and then into argument. Tom stepped forward, protecting what? People relied on that light. There was a hole out there. He the lines fast. 3 quick exchanges. "You muted the beacon." "I didn't." Gideon snapped. "I hid lights so men could slip past customs and land when the collectors were watching. People have mouths to feed. You risk our lives for a few smuggled barrels." Tom's voice rose, then cut out. The argument crackled. Words flew like loose stones. Gideon set the cloth bundle on a rock and unfolded a battered mirror. He kept his hands visible. "Look at me, Tom. Look at Elias. I know the coastline the way he knows the lamp. I only darken the spare lights when the collectors come down hard. We do what we must to feed children who would go hungry otherwise." His voice had a flat, hard edge that did not beg for sympathy. It gave motive. The reveal shifted the field of blame. The tampering had been deliberate, but not purely malicious. Elias listened and watched. He watched Gideon's fingers, the small twitch when Gideon admitted to intent. He watched Maggie's jaw tighten when she saw Gideon's thin bundle and then noticed the small needle and thread tin peeking out. Both Maggie and Anna's memory tightened like a loop. Elias' feelings moved again, doubt about how to act, then clarity when he remembered a specific morning. Anna mending nets by the kitchen window, her fingers rough with thread. The recalled detail was not a mood. It was a concrete anchor that steadied his choice. Gideon added, "We don't want ships to wreck. We want to move things quietly. When they watch the shore, they take our catch and our pay." "I miscalculated tonight." The last phrase read like admission and regret. A new piece of information surfaced. Gideon's tampering was tied to local economics and to a specific grudge with the collectors. That knowledge changed how Elias understood whom he was confronting. Tom did to lower his anger. "You miscalculated and someone nearly drowned." "Someone might have died tonight." Tom's words were a physical thrust. He strode toward Gideon and grabbed the mirror from the rock, holding it between them. "Why plant a signal that would drag a hole under the lee?" Tom demanded. Gideon met him with a thin, stubborn set to his mouth. Gideon answered with a small twist. "Because someone on that boat was not a smuggler. Someone there was asking for help. They were signaling to us, not to the collectors. We were trying to hide them from the law." The cave held the claim. It had the shape of a twist. The tampering had not only been to let goods slip, it had been to hide a human movement. The revelation reframed the night's arc and folded the locket into new meaning. Maggie, who had found the locket, stepped forward holding it out with both hands. "This was in the boat," she said. "It has initials inside." The letters were clear under the rain, dark metal. Elias felt the room tilt only in the sense that the locket's initials matched Anna's name. He did not let himself leap to conclusions. Instead, he acted on the concrete. He opened the locket with a practiced thumb and found a hair, dark and fine, folded between the halves. Elias held the hair with a gloved fingertip and did 3 things in quick succession. He checked the knot on his own handkerchief pocket for shape. He smelled the hair between his fingers, not for memory but for salt and lamp smoke. And he looked at Gideon, who on the boat had this. Elias, the question was both demand and method. Silence fell like a held breath. Gideon did not flinch, but his eyes shifted. "My sister tried to come in last week," he said. "She couldn't get through the customs. She's frightened of men who take more than pay. I told her to lie low here until I could arrange something clean. If she was on that boat, I was trying to hide her. I didn't mean to endanger anyone." The statement was precise. The twist landed. The signal had been human and specific, aimed at someone trying to avoid officials, not at wrecking a ship for gain. Tom's face twisted. "Gideon, you made a choice that could cost lives," he said. "You don't get to put people's safety behind your family's hunger." Their exchange went back and forth with short lines. "You don't know what it's like to scrape by. Gideon shot. We all know that Gideon," Tom returned. The argument met the requirement for a rapid, sharp confrontation, 3 to 6 quick responses that made the tension tangible. Ellis stepped between them and set a hand on Gideon's shoulder. "Enough. We have to secure the lamp and find who else knew about this. Elias, you will stay at the gallery. Tom, help with the boat. Maggie, look for more tracks. Gideon, you come with us until this clears." Ellis gave orders the way a man accustomed to councils gives orders. Clear, final, and aimed at containing the emergency. The orders shifted the emotional tempo toward organized action. They moved on the small tasks with precise motions. Tom and 2 townsmen hauled the boat ashore and lashed it to the rocks. Maggie and a helper scraped grit from the lamp gear while Elias climbed the stairs to relight a spare and check the main. He set the wick, trimmed it, and turned the brass key 3/4 to test the fuel flow. Each action was concrete, deliberate, an outward translation of inward resolve. Outside, the sea did not wait. A grey bulk showed on the horizon, slow and massive. Someone called, "There's a hull." The sight tightened the urgency in the group. The grey mass moved with the tide and the wind. It was not a phantom. The decision point moved near with a raw physicality. If the beacon remained uncertain, the hull could be drawn into the lee rocks. Back in the cave, Gideon made a small gesture that shifted the argument. He dug into his coat and produced a scrap of paper with a name and a birth number. "My sister's name is Anna Marsh," he said. "She used the name to keep safe. She's not the Anna Crane you think of." The line cleaved between possibility and concrete detail. The earlier emotional tug Elias felt at the locket loosened into a different knot. The locket bore similar initials but belonged to another Anna. The twist reduced personal claim but increased moral complexity. Elias' action was immediate. He took the scrap, folded it, and stuck it into his palm so he could feel the paper's edges while he moved. Then he pushed himself past Gideon, past the mirrors and damp clothes, and climbed toward the gallery. The climb was a physical exertion that matched his inner change, doubt receding into a decision to act. On the gallery, the lamp's operation demanded hands strict in rhythm. Elias checked the lens alignment and found one of the reflectors loosened, its brass screw back to turn. He tightened it with the small wrench he kept in a pocket. He worked with methodical motions, trim, test, rotate. The light steadied and the beam widened into the dark. The choice to secure the light was a tangible assertion of duty. Gideon watched from the cave mouth while Ellis and Tom worked to secure the shore. He did not speak until Maggie returned with news of a second set of tracks leading inland. They go toward the lane, and then vanish near the cooper's yard. She said, "Someone met them there or took them away." The new discovery supplied another turn. The night's sequence extended beyond the cave and involved more people than they'd first thought. Tom swore, then softened when Elias looked at him. "We have to tell the town watch, Tom." Ellis nodded. He turned to Elias. "Stay at the gallery. If that hull changes course, you'll need to be the steady hand we trust." His words put responsibility back where it belonged and removed personal suspicion. At least for the moment. Elias felt one final emotion shift, from suspicion to doubt to clear, practiced resolve. They hauled the boats and chains with cooperative force. Townsmen moved with the particular bluntness of people used to late nights and heavy tasks. The mast of the beached boat scraped as they pulled it onto firmer ground. A search for a missing passenger would begin at first light. The group organized itself into small units. Tom would question witnesses, Maggie would check the lane, Ellis would speak with the town watch, and Gideon would remain until a statement could be taken. A new reveal arrived as Tom opened the boat's small locker to inventory what remained. A slip of paper with an address in the town and a small coin purse with 2 coins. The coin bore a foreign stamp. They came from farther south, Tom. That concrete detail altered their assumptions about the Hull's origin. The night multiplied into new facts. Elias went back to the logbook at dawn and set the brass oil key on the desk. He uncapped the pen, hands steady now with fatigue rather than tremor. He wrote dates, times, and facts. The lamp's hiccup at 11:59, the arrival of the drenched man, the discovery of tampering, the found locket and its initials, Gideon's admission. The Hull sighted at dawn and the list of actions taken. Each line was plain and tight. He added a note. 1 life unconfirmed. Further inquiry required. The pen left a small smudge where his hand had steadied over the paper. Outside, as the sky washed into pale blue, workers clustered around the beached boat. Gideon stood at the margin and did not meet Elias's eyes. Maggie slipped the locket into Elias's palm before he could protest. He felt the cold metal lie against his skin. He opened it again at the table and checked the hair one more time. The initials were not Anna Crane S., but the object kept its power to remind him why he kept the lamp lit. To preserve small things, names, lives, a single needle's worth of safety. The tide moved out and left the shore strewn with wet drift and a single extinguished lantern where the surf had rolled it toward the sand. People worked with steady hands to make what had been damaged usable again. The harbor's noises were the ordinary noises of a place that refuses to give up its living. Rope smacks, men shouting numbers, the scrape of oars. Elias closed the logbook, feeling the weight of action and its consequences. He paced the gallery once, fingers splayed along the rail, then turned the brass oil key twice until it clicked, and the lamp hummed with its steady, mechanical life. He had chosen duty. He had confronted a human motive. He had recorded facts that would follow into town records and hearings. The night's wound remained. Gideon slipped away before a full accounting could be made, and one passenger's fate remained uncertain. There was no neat justice in the morning. There was only work to be done and a light to keep. Elias slid the small silver locket into his inner coat pocket, not as a talisman but as a ledger of particulars. He would hand it to the town watch when they had a name to match it to, and he would write the details into the log for others to check. He set the oil key on the hook by the door, closed the ledger with a measured hand, and locked the lantern room hatch behind him. He stepped out onto the gallery, rain still glinting on the stones, and watched the horizon where the Hull had been, now gone, its presence reduced to the damp sand and a few scattered footprints. He turned the key once more, ensuring the lamp's mechanism would not fail on his watch. And then he descended the stairs to join the men who would follow whatever next fact the morning brought. The lantern glass split under Elias's hand as a wind gust shoved rain through the gallery door. He grabbed the brass rim and felt the shards bite the pad of his thumb. Suspicion rose in him like a physical ache. Someone had interfered with the lamp. Voices downstairs rose into the howl of the wind. "Elias!" The light went out. A tombre shouted from below. Elias tasted oil and salt. He moved because the lamp belonged to others now. He forced the gallery door closed with his shoulder and set his boot against the sill. The mantle lay twisted on the brick, wick blackened and torn. He worked fast, fingers numb in the oilskin, thumb finding the brassed oil key, and then the rag wedged into the burner. Each tug brought grit with it. He shoved the rag aside, thumb bleeding where a shard had nicked him, and smelled wet wool and lamp smoke. He did not pause to name the fear. He moved and let action answer. Elias had been up for hours. Earlier, the lamp had hiccuped and thrown a ragged arc before guttering 2 nights ago. He had forced it steady then and written the incident in the log. 2 nights after that, a drenched man had pounded the door and cried that a dark hull had scraped the lee shore. Tom Bray had come again tonight, breathless and furious, and now the harbour-master's voice climbed the stair in a slow, hard tide. The conflict was clear. The lamp had failed when other boats were near. If the light failed by neglect, men would die. If the light failed by sabotage, someone had tried to kill the line between sea and shore. He wiped his hands on his coat and hissed at the sting. He could hear them below, a cluster of fishermen arguing with the harbour-master. Yes? Explain yourself. Where were you? Tom's voice cracked. Ilias set the brass key on the bench and turned the lantern's casing with a practiced shrug. He kept his hands moving so his mind could not dwell on Anna's voice humming over a seam in a washed-out shirt. He felt guilt press at the back of his throat. That guilt slid into suspicion again, then into a quiet resolve. If the lamp could be readied, blame might be halted. He descended the spiral stairs with the logbook under his arm. Wind shoved at the base of the lighthouse, and the wood complained with every step. At the landing, Tom Bray met him, rain clinging to his beard, hands open and raw. The harbour-master stood to the left, cap in hand, face pale under stubble. A deckhand clutched something wrapped in oilcloth. The men smelled of salt and fear. Dialogue rose quick and sharp. Ilias, your light faltered. Tom, men, your lamp blinked as they rounded the lee. A coaster ran close. You must answer, Tom. The mantle cracked, the glass split. I fixed what I could. Ilias' voice was low. He the facts and kept his hands steady on the logbook fixed. The boat beached below. Men hauled a gent to shore. Who will answer for him? The harbour-master's words hit like a mallet. Harbour-master, we did all we could once we saw the whole. I came when Tom shouted. Ilias set the logbook on a bench, open to the entry he had made 2 nights prior. Look, I wrote the hiccup down. I trimmed the wick. I kept watch. He tapped his fingers against the page. He named what he had done so the others could measure whether it was enough. Tom leaned in. Ilias, the lantern's glass isn't he only cracked. Someone shoved a rag inside the burner. There's grit in the gears. That looks like tampering. The word tampering landed in the stairwell like a thrown stone. Ilias felt the room tilt, but he kept his face still. He thought of the beached rowboat from earlier, of the drenched man pounding at his door, of the small coil of suspicion that had followed each incident. Who found it? He asked deckhand. Tom, he pulled something from the rocks. Come see. The men moved as one, hauling Ilias toward the shore. They did not give him time to change or to patch his raw thumb properly. The wind pushed him along. On the rocks the boat lay half, washed against barnacled stone. A lantern hung at the stern dim. A man sat slumped under a blanket, hair plastered to his forehead. The deckhand set the oilcloth on a tack, worn rock, and unfolded it. Beneath, a scrap of cloth and a tarnished locket glinted. Ilias' hands went cold. He knew that stitch. Anna had mended a shirt like that. He had seen that locket in her palm the night before she had tucked it into the box and told him not to wear it while at sea. Tom stepped forward. This came from the rocks beside the boat. Whose stitch is that? Ilias touched the locket as if it might burn him. He had not seen it since Anna's funeral. He felt a loop of memory tighten. Her nimble fingers sewing a rag without looking. The small click of the locket closing. The memory was a single, exact scene. The place, the needle, the smell of mend, day tea, and it steadied his hands instead of scattering his thoughts. Emotion shifted from suspicion to a raw, private ache. Then that ache hardened into something else, determination. He would not let a scrap of his wife's life be used to pin blame and shame on him. Where did you find this? Ilias the deckhand, right under the stern, the deckhand said, tangled in kelp. It was wet as fish breath. The gent in the boat want to speak much. He keeps opening his eyes and looking at the lighthouse, as if blaming it for his luck. The deckhand's words were short. He spat salt and fear. Harbour-master, take the gent to the inn, warm him. Then tell Tom to stand watch at the water. I need the lamp inspected. Ilias' voice rose an inch. He was the keeper. The men could press him with questions, but he could still assert tasks. The harbour-master nodded and barked orders. People moved outward into motion. An external event broke the pressure. The gent in the boat coughed and muttered a name. Anna, the gent said. The word came like a wounded animal. Silence snapped. Ilias' jaw tightened. The name meant nothing literal about the gent's identity, but it fixed a knot in the men's minds. Tom stepped closer, eyes hard. "Anna." "Who's Anna?" he demanded. Elias put a hand on the decan's shoulder. "Tom, let him breathe. We will not make accusations on a wet scrap and a name blood from fever." "We look at the lamp." He turned back toward the lighthouse with the logbook still under his arm. He felt the men's eyes on his back. Suspicion walked with them. They climbed the stairs again and inspected the lamp. The burner had a rag pushed deep into it, grit packed between jeers. The glass was cracked across a seam. Elias stripped the casing down with methodical movements. He moved his hands the way he always had, trimming, polishing, turning screws until new light could be coaxed. Each action held emotion, hands trembling, breath stuttered, jaw set, but he showed the work, not the ache. The harbourmaster watched him closely. "Elias, who would do this?" he asked. "I do not know, Elias, but someone placed the rag and the grit. That is deliberate." The word deliberate hung in the room. The harbourmaster's face went tight. "Is there anyone who profits from dark coasts?" he asked. Tom answered before Elias could. "Shipmen who would run the lee. Smugglers. Or someone who hates this light." Tom's voice carried the quick suspicion of men who watch tides and reckon with crooked deals. He the facts with fewer words than Elias. Tom's tone was blunt. It left less room for the private Elias carried. Elias' mind looped. The deckhand had brought the locket. The gent had said Anna. A twist formed in his chest. He could imagine a motive. A man angry that the lighthouse spoiled his chance. A rival lightkeeper with a grudge. A local who blamed Elias for some private loss. He made a decision. "We search the shore again. Elias, we check who left for sea tonight, and who knew the lantern would give a chance for a passing hull. Tom, you and the harbourmaster take 2 men and the gent to the inn. Deckhand, bring the boat up. I will secure the lamp." The men moved with the sharp efficiency of people whose work had weight. They found nothing more than trampled kelp and a boot with 2 holes. The town's lights remained low and thin. The inn kept the wounded man by a hearth while the harbourmaster paced the room and asked blunt, pointed questions. In the inn, Tom argued with the harbourmaster in crisp exchanges that turned on accusation, blame, and the practical need for answers. "Harbourmaster, are you saying the keeper could let the light die?" "Tom, I'm saying someone broke the lamp and the coast nearly lost a ship. Who cares about intent when men drown?" The harbourmaster replied, "I care about Elias. He keeps the light. He kept it before." Tom's voice softened for a moment. "Elias saved my brother last year." The line dropped like a stone of proof. The harbourmaster's shoulders eased. But then the gent at the table moaned and turned his head toward the window. He saw the lantern blink. The gent said, "It blinked as if it had been put out." An external fact returned and redrove the men into suspicion. At the lamp room, Elias worked alone under the small ring of light he had coaxed back. He laid the old locket on the bench and watched it catch the golden lamplight. Memory rose not as fog but as the exact motion of Anna's hands. He saw her tuck a thread into the hem, saw the small needle catch, heard the tin of thread click closed. He felt a pivot of emotion. Grief, yes, but then steadiness. He pressed a thumb into the brass key and turned. He shut the lamp's lid and felt its heat spread through his palm. He let the action anchor him. A cold knock came at the door. Tom's voice followed. "Elias, you must," he began, then cut off. The harbourmaster stood behind him. "We need you to tell the truth, Elias. If the lamp was tampered with, you must let us know if you suspected anyone." The question was an attempt to draw confession. It shifted Elias again, this time from guarded to defensive. "Harbourmaster, I suspected nothing until I saw grit in the gears and a rag shoved into the burner." "Elias, I told you what I had written in the log. I will not hide facts. I will not hide a name I do not have." He set the locket in his palm and opened it. Inside, a smudge of brown. He touched it with his nail and felt a memory of Anna's laugh when he had first worn his cap at sea. The memory calmed him enough to speak plainly. "If you were asking who would disable this lamp, you should ask who benefits from a dark night, Elias. Ask the captains. Ask the men who curse the light. But do not shape guilt into me because you feel fear tonight." His voice did not rise much, but it held a hardness that made Tom step back. Outside, a new event cut the room. A shout from the shore. Someone cried that the beached rowboat listed strangely. People ran down the stair. Footsteps thudded like a second tide. The moment pulled each man into motion. Elias followed, gripping the logbook. They found the little boat now shifted, a rope worn thin at its cleat. The deckhand pointed to a footprint in the wet sand, half smudged, heading away from the beach toward the lane that led to town. It was a small, specific clue, and it forced the group into a decision. The harbormaster barked orders. Tom and two men ran the lane while Elias stood frozen for one counted breath. In that second, Anna's voice threaded through his head not as a metaphor, but as a remembered instruction. She had once told him, "Write down what you see, Elias. Facts will keep you steady." He went to the shore, stooped, and began to make notes while the others ran. He listed the footprints, its size, the angle, the depth of the tread. He noted the boat's sag. Writing acted as a tether. Emotion shifted. Suspicion became methodical inquiry. Tom returned, panting, with a neighbor at his shoulder. "We found a man who left a cart by the quay. He had a coat with an unfamiliar mark. He left out after dark." He wouldn't answer why. Tom's speech came in short bursts. The harbormaster took the report and set his jaw. "Search the quay. See who left at dusk, and who had a reason to want the light dark. Ask the innkeeper if any stranger shared a table tonight." Orders flew. The men dispersed like knots letting go. Elias walked back to the lighthouse with the locket in his pocket. He paused at the stair landing and let a memory of Anna's patient hands steady him. He pictured her mending the torn sleeve and humming a short, tuneless habit. He did not romanticize the image. He described it to himself in exact detail. The way she threaded a needle with one hand, the smell of boiled nettle at the basin, the small dimple in her left cheek when concentration bent her face. The memory combed the trimmer in his fingers. He closed his jaw and climbed up to the gallery. Dawn came thin and pale. The wind had less teeth. At the exposed gallery, the sea hammered with a final, angry insistence. Elias climbed onto the iron walkway outside the lantern room in a gale to clear the burner fully and relight the great lamp. Spray spattered his face. The metal under his boots was slick. Tom followed and grabbed the rail behind him. The harbormaster stayed below, shouting updates and counting the minutes. "Elias, keep hold." Tom shouted, "I have hold," Elias answered. The action on the gallery was the chapter's peak. Wind tried to wrench him off his feet. He worked the burner with hands that ached. He cleared grit with a knife, hauled the rag free with trembling fingers, and replaced the mantle with a breath between gritted teeth. A wave crashed so hard that salt showered the glass, and the iron shrieked under pressure. Tom reached a hand forward and caught Elias' cuff as the keeper lost footing for a heartbeat. Their hands met. The grip was almost a small human rescue. "Tom, hold the line." The harbormaster shouted from below. Tom's voice came back, "I'm holding." He yanked a coil of rope and braced his legs. 4 rapid, sharp lines of argument and command passed between them as they fought the elements. "Yes! The mantle! I have it! Brace! Now!" Each line short, necessary. The physical struggle carried the emotional truth. Elias' duty and Tom's loyalty collided with the sea's appetite. For a long breath the burner would not catch. Elias bent over, lips bare, and struck a match with numb fingers. He thought of Anna's methodical hands again and shaped that motion into a new one. Breathe steady, strike, lift, set flame, the mantle took. Light crawled up the glass like slow blood. The great lamp shivered and then steadied into a soft, round glow. Men below let out a sound that was half curse and half prayer. When the light burned steady, the sea seemed less cruel. Tom hauled Elias inside and wrapped him in blankets. He shivered, body shaking from salt and strain. The harbormaster's face softened, and then folded into a measured gratitude. "You kept it going, Elias. You kept it going when it mattered," he said. The words were concrete, not flowery. They gave Elias a small, earned relief. They helped Elias to the desk. He set the logbook down. Tom sat and rubbed his hands together, watching Elias closely. The deckhand came in with news. The town had detained a man near the quay with an unfamiliar coat and a mark like a smudge of lamp, black. They had no proof of intent, but the man had gone out to sea the same hour others had reported seeing the dark hull. The harbormaster promised to hold him while they questioned witnesses. That new fact shifted suspicion outward towards someone else. Emotion moved again. From danger and blame toward tentative clarity. Elias took one quiet breath and wrote a short, clear entry in the log. He wrote the facts. Time's actions observed tampering and the finding of the locket. He wrote Anna's name once, not as a flourish but as a fact of evidence and of how it had drawn his own inner life into the night's events. He closed the book and slit the leather tie around it. Before he left the lantern room, Elias opened his palm and placed Anna's locket on the rim of the great lamp. He did not say words. He set it where the heat would warm its metal. He did this as a private anchor, a small ritual that would not change the law or the harbormaster's judgment, but would steady his own hands in the future. Tom watched without comment. The harbormaster glanced up and then away. In the pale morning hush they took stock. The detained man swore that he had been hired to frighten crews away from a smuggler's run, and that he had nothing to do with the beached boat's cargo. His coat bore the mark of a tavern known for rough work and rougher men. Witnesses contradicted one another in small ways. The harbormaster promised an investigation. Tom paced and argued quietly with the deckhand about rope maintenance and the timing of the reported blink. Practical details filled the room. Action shaped the conclusion. Elias refused to lean on speeches. He sat, hands wrapped in blankets, and watched a small fishing boat become a dark smudge on the horizon. He felt the night's toll in his limbs and the memory of Anna's hands in his chest. The town would decide blame. The harbormaster would hold his inquiry. Men would tell stories and point. Elias's duty, however, remained simple. He had put the light back where it belonged. He had done the work. A final decision landed in a quiet, concrete action. Elias opened the lantern room once more and set the locket into a little niche behind the burner. He tucked it where only he would see it when he wound the mechanism. He then wrote 2 words at the bottom of the log. Lamp steady, he signed his name. He closed the book and handed it to Tom. Tom, tell them the lamp held because I kept it. Tell them the facts. Let the inquiry do the rest, Elias. Tom nodded and took the log. He put a hand on Elias' shoulder, a simple gesture of shared labor, not a speech. I will, Elias. Tom. Elias stood and walked to the gallery to watch the small boat until it slid from sight. The gulls called once. The dawn pulled light back into the world in flat, honest strips. He felt the sting in his thumb and the warmth of the lamp behind him. He did not promise change or dramatic vows. He closed the lantern room door, left Anna's locket where heat would keep it safe, and locked the log in the desk. He had kept the line between sea and shore, that duty remained anchored in small, exact acts. He walked down the stairs toward the men gathering questions and proof, ready to meet their need for answers. A knock came on the lower door as he reached it. The harbormaster called, "We have a man to question." "Come speak with us." Elias pulled his coat close and stepped into the base room, prepared to answer with facts, to let witnesses speak, and to let the town decide. The lamp kept burning above them. The small boat on the horizon shrank to a dot. He moved toward the questioning, toward the work of sorting blame from misfortune. The final motion of the chapter was simple and concrete. Elias unbuttoned his coat, smoothed the logbook under his arm, and went to speak his truth.